privilege to be the person who is convening this panel. I am a product of public schools in South Carolina, but first in Alabama, which is my home. Moved to South Carolina as a hostage of my parents at age 13 and finished my public education here. I worship at Trinity Cathedral. I was married in this church. I was ordained in this church. My daughter and my husband both were baptized in this church. I had the privilege of serving on its staff for a number of years. And I currently serve on my bishop's staff as the coordinator of the Public Education Initiative of the Fellowship of South Carolina Bishops. You heard Andrew Waldo speak a little bit about that last night in the introduction when he told you that this comes out of the vision of bishops in several denominations in South Carolina to band together and put the weight of their office and their voice behind a full and flourishing public education for all children. And so that's my work, to coordinate that effort. It is a two-pronged effort. Basically, it is a relationship building enterprise where we are calling the people of these denominations to put their bodies on the line, to put their bodies in the schools, to develop relationships with children and teachers and parents in supporting them in their schools. There's an orchestration of relationships that would not happen without this initiative. People are meeting each other that would not have known each other without a little bit of a push, a little bit of a challenge. And I want to echo again two things that Jeff said last night, because we're learning this a lot through what we do, that students won't care what we know until they know that we care. And that's true in every dimension of the work involved with this initiative, of showing that we care and deeply care. He also said something that I'm going to quote over and over and over again from here on out, which is, we will never policy our way out of this situation. Equity will occur when we continue to care and build relationships that show we care. So when we go into schools, we ask, what do you need and how can we help? We're not here to fix anything. We're here to join with you. So that's prong one of the initiative. The other prong is advocacy and awareness. I'm going to build a little bit on what my colleague Caroline Malden said earlier today about the fact of being in South Carolina means that we know, as you know, that we face a lot of challenges. In this state, 72% of fourth graders are not proficient in reading. 27% of our children live in poverty. 90.9% of South Carolina teachers buy school supplies for their students out of their own pocket. And that is true even when we know that salaries for teachers in South Carolina fell from 39th worst in the nation in the years 2013 to 14 to 47th worst in the nation in the last couple of years. So we know that we've got hurdles. It's a big picture. But we also know that there are many positive things in South Carolina of which we're proud. Some of them have already been mentioned in other workshops today, but I do want to underline one, is that we are the home of a very important education center in Florence, South Carolina. It's a one-of-a-kind center of excellence to prepare teachers to teach children of poverty, giving them strategies to work with children around issues of brain development. And this is a little fact that I learned when I started doing this work that just thrills me to pieces. South Carolina has more public Montessori schools than any state in the union. Ben's laughing. He's from Richmond. He thinks, yeah. But I want you to know that there are many good things about that. There are many good things in South Carolina happening. We have huge hurdles. And through this work, we get to blend some of those things together. So our work and our call in advocacy, in part, is to continue to ask each other the question and prod each other to say, what are you going to do now that you know? Now that you know, what are you going to do about it? How are you going to exercise your capital, your gifts, your abilities to make a difference? And part of the way we do that is also to provide cover for the people who are on the front line. That was said this morning in our panel by Kanita, who said that was one of the things she really valued about this kind of work, is that advocates, supporters of public education who are not in the profession can provide cover. And we do that for our teachers. We also do it for our legislators, our decision makers. We can challenge them and provide cover for them to do the things that they want to do. So that's a little bit about my work. Now, I want to tell you what our understanding as we put this panel together, that this panel has a fourfold purpose. The first purpose of this panel is to offer you all some concrete examples of the church's impact on public education at both the local and systematic levels. The second purpose is to offer inspiration of how each of us can make a difference where we are. Each one of us can make a difference in our own locations. Third, we want to give you some examples of how this work is transforming the lives of people in the congregations connected to the work that we'll talk about with our panel members around the country. And our fourth purpose of this panel is to offer some resources for learning of how to connect, how to collaborate in your own community for quality, superior education for all children. I hope you walk out of here fired up and ready to do some great things. And we're delighted to bring folks from various parts of the country. We've got Florida, New York, and California represented on this panel today. We had Tennessee, but weather kept him from being with us, and we miss him, Stan Weber. His travel was imperiled by weather, and so he's not going to be here. But I do want to welcome the panelists all, and thank you for making the effort to come to South Carolina and be with us for this. And you all have their biographies in your work, and so we're not going to go through those, but I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves to you by telling you a little bit of their story. We had a conversation prior to this panel where we talked about this with each other, and there was a theme that ran through something that each of them said. They talked about their work in terms of call and in terms of moral duty. And so in light of call and moral duty, I'd like you to introduce yourselves to us answering these questions. Who nurtured you personally as a reconciler or a justice bearer? Or who invited you or equipped you to seek relationships across dividing walls such as race, geography, or class? And Kimberly, we'll start with you.
So probably to answer that question, I wouldn't start until I was in my 30s. So let me start a little before then. I grew up about 2 hours from here on a little farm where, like Susan, I felt like a hostage. At times, I was born in 1965, which was the time LBJ was signing new federal education law and civil rights law. So I was raised very much a product of that time. Religion saturated our life 3 times a week in the Baptist faith. But one of my earliest memories is going to first grade, the first day of school, and my teacher was the only African American teacher and the first African American teacher at that school, and my parents were livid and did everything they could to get me out of that. So any dozens and dozens of experiences like that growing up. After I graduated from college, didn't know what to do, so I took a job at a newspaper here in South Carolina The Klan was having a resurgence of activity, and so I followed them around on parades and cross burnings. So but this was something that I knew just wasn't right, but it was couched in religion growing up. So then I went to DC, became a business lobbyist, gave no thought to anything of moral consequence until I went to seminary. And that's when really my worldview, my politics, my understanding of the way of Christ really changed. After seminary, I went to Jacksonville and served 2 different pastorates. Both of those churches had preschools. The first preschool served very affluent families. It was a feeder school to the most exclusive private school. The second church was a more diverse church, and that preschool was lower income and diverse, and the disparity there in education was just so obvious. And I knew how important education had been in my life, so when I heard about the Cathedral Arts Project, it seemed like really where I was called.
Thank you so much, and it's great to be with you for this conference. I'm Bill Franklin, the Bishop of the Episcopal Diocese of Western New York. Western New York is Buffalo, the metropolitan region of Buffalo, Niagara Falls, Jamestown, so Columbia feels like Western New York today on a warm day. So just to give you a little sense about our neighborhoods up there. Buffalo, I've been the bishop, I'm going into my 8th year now. Buffalo is the 3rd most segregated city in the United States. It's also the city where our presiding bishop, Bishop Michael Curry, was raised. His father was a priest in our diocese, and Bishop Curry was among the first generation of children really to integrate the school. So I'm so sorry he's not going to be with us. 2 things influenced my ministry in Buffalo, and I want to share both of those. First of all, I stood up among the small group of Southerners who've lived in the North. I was born in Mississippi. I'm a native. And in the 1950s, my grandmother made a deep impact on my life. In her small town, Brookhaven, Mississippi, in 1956, an African citizen was shot dead walking into the courthouse to vote for Dwight D. Eisenhower. Never charged. It infuriated my grandmother. She said, we're going to have to do something about that. And in those days in Mississippi, we could not, as a white family, go to black churches and sit down and have a meal. It was against the law to have a public black-white meal. So my grandmother invited African-American Christians to her house, white Christians, for a meal together. And there I saw this image of black hands and white hands in the 1950s in Mississippi together. Wasn't I a lucky guy?
Amen.
That I had that to see. And one day, the Ku Klux Klan went through the town. A man from the Ku Klux Klan on his horse rode up to the front porch and said to her, you've got to stop those meals. And she never stopped. So I was also inspired by her courage. That happened to be her brother Troy, we found out later. Fast forward to being elected bishop in Buffalo, Western New York, segregated city. Having had this experience of the dehumanization of segregation, I thought, what am I going to do? Our diocese is small, 57 dioceses, overwhelmed by 600,000 Roman Catholics. Mighty African-American churches. What was a little old Episcopal church going to do? So I prayed about this. I was sitting at my desk one day, and a chubby, white-haired man walked in front of my house with his dog. He took that dog into my front porch. This dog started to do its business. I was at my desk. I looked outside the door. I thought, oh my God, this is happening in my yard. I ran down there and I said, what are you doing? Get that dog out of my yard. And by the way, what do you do for a living that you would do something like this? He said, I'm a bishop. And I said, oh, I'm a bishop too. What kind of bishop are you? He said, I'm a Roman Catholic. I'm the Roman Catholic Bishop of Buffalo. And I said, I'm the Episcopal Bishop of Western New York. Why don't we get together? He lived around the block. We started having a drink now and then by the fire. We have lots of fires in Buffalo in weather like this. And we got to become friends. And so we began to talk about the issue of segregation. And so we wrote 2 pastoral letters together about how Buffalo is now going through an economic renaissance, that we had to stand for racial equity. You use those words in these 2 letters. And believe it or not, they made a great impact, I believe, on our region. People still come up to me and say, thank you for those letters. And so here we were, this little denomination, but because we were connecting to the Roman church, the African American churches started coming to us and saying, let's work together. This opened a door. And though Vicki Zust, who's here with me from my diocese, has been doing a lot of work in our diocese, this was an impetus for our diocese really to get involved in racial equity, particularly in education and housing. I'll talk more about that later. But these are the 2 acts of grace that got me into our work.
Great, thank you, Bill. Jackie.
Thank you. Good afternoon. In my tradition, laity does not speak after clergy, so I guess I should be quiet.
No, go right ahead. That's not true of the Episcopal Church, of course.
I think it's really an interesting question that our moderator has asked, and I would have to say that I'm in this work because of DNA. My maternal grandfather was a trailblazer in his own way. He operated the only shoemaking shop in Tallahassee, Florida, downtown. African Americans had to go, blacks or coloreds or Negroes at the time, had to go to the back door to get their shoes made and served, and whites went to the front. The way he handled that was to make sure, as best he could, that his children never had to face the issues of segregation. And so my mother came up in a very protected environment. But she was smart enough to marry a man who found himself in the African Methodist Episcopal Church as one of the leaders of the Tallahassee bus boycott that most people don't know about. It ran simultaneous to the Montgomery bus boycott. I remember vividly, as a child, Rosa Parks coming to encourage us in 1956. And so I knew that I was in a household and a family where that was important. Our game during that period was to learn to crawl around our home because the sheriffs refused to protect our family. And so we had to crawl so that we were not hit by a stray bullet that would come through the window. We would not have to watch the cross on the lawn. I felt that was a good enough sacrifice. My father had done this. But then somehow about my 12th grade, when they discovered that Florida State University was the last public college in Florida to desegregate, my high school teacher went to my parents and other parents and urged them to let me go to Florida State. If you're about my age, your parents didn't ask you if that's what you were going to do. They told you that's what you were going to do. And so as I sat in the awards assembly expecting my full scholarship to FAMU to be announced, it was announced that I was going to Florida State. And so I was one of 4 students, 4 African-American students in 10,000 population at Florida State University, where they really did not want us to be. My coping skill was to complete a 4-year curriculum in 2 2/3 years. Quitting was not an option. Beyond that, advocacy became something that I valued. My father died at 83, and I was a daddy's girl. So I felt I had to carry on what he did. And so when I had the opportunity to become the social action officer of the AME Church, I thought, yes, I can carry on this legacy in the African Methodist Episcopal Church. And I really thought I was doing a great job of advocating about things that are important: mass incarceration, poverty, voting is my big passion. And then along came somebody named Zakiya Jackson from the Expectations Project. And she kept trying to tell me we weren't doing enough because we were not looking at the trauma that happens in public education. She really had my attention, and I planned to be very polite and then go on and hand that to someone who wore the label educator. But then she pulled her ace card. She said, "You know my grandmama." And her grandmama was one of my sheroes. And I had to then listen. And I saw in Zakiya the baton she was carrying for her grandmother. And I had to pay attention. And it absolutely made sense I was actually in a traumatic environment at Florida State after a nurturing environment at FAMU High School. But I understood that I had had the opportunity to have been nurtured. Someone had told me I could succeed. Someone had told me, no matter what anybody else said, that I was smart. And so I was armed. I thought about all of the young people who did not have that. We actually sent them into war zones at a very early age. And we had an obligation. And so we were inspired by Zakiya, having gone to meet Nicole, that there was something we had to do. And so I had to make sure the whole AME church got it. And so we started talking about the trauma-informed schools. We asked our local congregations, what are you doing? And I was surprised to find how many already understood the vision. And we're pleased that we, at that point, were going to bring together a national initiative among AME churches. And so I'm pleased to share with you what the people are doing. It is my job as a social action officer to make sure that the issues are lifted up, that resources we can beg, borrow, are made available to our churches, that partnerships can be created. And so for many of the denominations, especially the Episcopal Church, we found some partnerships and other things. We look forward to being sure that we can continue to partner with each one of you. And so I hope when we leave today that you will go in search of an African Methodist Episcopal Church somewhere in the neighborhood where your church is. And then you call me, and I'll be sure you have a partner.
Hey,
That's good.
thank you so much. All right, well, let's turn now to your work, to what you're doing currently. And Kimberly, we'll go back to you and ask you to tell us what you're doing and what you're learning through your work.
The Cathedral Arts Project is a ministry of St. John's Episcopal Cathedral, and our specific focus is equitable access to high-quality, standards-based arts education. And we focus that very broadly, so it could be access for lower-income students, students of color, students with specialized needs, students in the jail, or LGBT students. And I always tell people, if you really care about public education, you've got to care about arts education, because arts education is so powerful in terms of student engagement. The dropout rate for lower income youth overall is 22%, but lower income youth who are engaged in meaningful quality arts education, the dropout rate is only 4%. So that's a dramatic difference. We provide arts education in a number of ways, direct services and advocacy. Our largest program is Arts Ignite, which is an after-school program. So a student in our program is in our program for the entire year. So they may be learning to play violin or step or theater or music in general or visual arts. And we serve about 1,000 students each week throughout the school year with that program. We also have a number of school day programs, arts integration, students with specialized needs, and then we have advocacy.
Thank you. Bill.
Again, remember our issue is addressing segregation. We've addressed it through working for equity in two broad areas. And one is education, the other one is the use of our buildings. In education, there have been two areas. First, school partnerships. Vicki Zust, who's part of the planning committee for this conference, led the way as rector of St. Paul's Harris Hill in developing close relationships with two schools. Harris Hill is a suburban church, but the congregation developed a close relationship with School 6 in the inner city of Buffalo. A school, 85% of the students are students of color. 18 languages are spoken by the student body. It is the neighborhood of our presiding bishop where he grew up in Buffalo. And so particularly working with congregation member, now a deacon, Mona Gaddis, Vicki and Mona Gaddis worked together to have a whole cadre of members of the congregation who could serve as tutors and mentors of kindergarten children, and also to be engaged in bringing supplies and books, a regular program of bringing books so that they knew they were cared about by this suburban congregation. She developed also a partnership with a suburban school, which is really across the street from the church. And in one way, that partnership worked. Whenever there are evacuation days, practicing for an attack or something, the children and the teachers come to Harris Hill School. And through that, there have been pastoral relationships. When somebody dies in a family, they don't have a church, they'll call Vicki. That's been a model that has inspired 5 other churches in our diocese. Secondly, we have developed the Eaton Reading Camp, Sing Again. Reading for kindergarten through 3rd grade is a gift we can give to public school students. 7 weeks in the summer. The kind of environment that we heard about from Dr. Jeff, we've tried to create. We've evolved through 3 patterns. The first year, a lot of the mentors were teenagers from across the country who came on mission trips. Then we moved into a Center City parish where we had our own parishioners serving as mentors. And now we're in a nearby small city, Lockport, which is having these camps, again, one summer, next summer as well. So that inspired 2 other congregations to do reading camps. So the inspiration of one church doing something or one diocese project inspiring other people.
Great.
That's been the last thing I'll say. Housing and our buildings have been very important for us. Turning unused space or churches that are being abandoned in our denomination, we're trying to turn into affordable housing. Let me say the last thing I want to say, and then I'll come back to me. What have we learned? It takes patience. Vicki told me she had to go 34 hours one time to school board meetings merely to get a school board to accept a $1,000 gift. All right? We have been working since 2015 on one affordable housing project at our Ascension Church, which the congregation's moved out of there. We had to take 7 people from the diocese to the Common Council of Buffalo 2 weeks ago to testify about this. So this work takes patience, it takes ecumenical cooperation, it takes looking at the long term, and it takes God's grace.
Thank you. Okay, Jackie, tell us what you're doing.
I'd like to share 3 examples. Last night, I think it was, we were reminded about what ultimately became Brown versus Topeka Board of Education in 1954. And while we take great pride in that, of those 5 cases, 4 of them involved the African Methodist Episcopal Church. Upon moving to California, I was reminded, or maybe just informed because I didn't know, that there was a major case that Governor Earl Warren had been a part of solidifying in California, not the South, California, before Board v. Board of Education. Do you know about that case? Mendez versus Westminster. 5 Latino fathers sued the Orange County Board of Education, and because even though Latinos were classified as honorary white, they were put in separate schools. And that case was approved and nothing happened. And so as we talked about Brown v. Board of Education and the fact we're more segregated today, I'm reminded again that Coretta Scott King was correct. Every generation must be convinced anew. And so our work today is to remember that and to move forward. And that is what inspired one of our clergy spouses to try to make impact in Dayton, Ohio, with a school system that was non-performing. And she found it very difficult, as many of us do, trying to intercede with public education. It took more time than parents had to be involved in their kids' education. And so she ultimately followed the example of Richard Allen and Absalom Jones, that educate your own. And so she was a part of setting up the Richard Allen schools that now are a wonderful example of public charter schools. It is not the preference, it is a way they could ensure they were not going to lose the kids who were currently in the elementary system. And that has continued. It's a model that she is anxious to share across the country with anybody who will listen, because she is very convinced that Richard Allen and Absalom Jones had it correct, that things about the learning patterns that we as people of faith bring that go beyond the subject matter, but it deals with the basic values that our young people need to have. And then secondly, and very excitingly, in Rahway, New Jersey, one of our young seminarians, a graduate of Payne, felt that he had to go back and deal with education, I'll call it among the detained, those who are incarcerated and in prison, especially the state and county jail houses. And they've worked very, very hard, and he just sent an email out last week that in New Jersey now they have made a decision about the prisons and education in the prisons. And so Reverend Charles Boyer and Yahweh is rooting, and we're rooting for him, because if we can find a way not to have detachment of young people and older people who are in prison, that their lives can continue, the rehabilitation is a part of it, that it's exciting. And it's a coalition that is interfaith, and it has other civic and community groups in it. But he has taken this as a part of the faith walk, and we've been able to support him. But in Los Angeles, we were inspired by the Expectations Project to take a look at the second largest public school system in this nation that is seriously underperforming. And the way we're trying to settle the problem is by setting in place public charter schools, which is actually a de facto resegregation. The public charter schools are yet to be tested. This is not a statement against them, but it's a statement that we cannot abandon the public education system where most of the young people are, where the parents are very dependent upon this being the equalizer for their young people, and we must not abandon that. And so we thought, what do we do? There are lots of educators in the African Methodist Episcopal Church, more than any other profession. But we were driven to say it is not just the teacher, it is not just the administrator, it is not just a school board member. Everyone who touches that child's life is important. And so we asked in Southern California to identify yourself. If you were the bus driver, if you are the cafeteria worker, if you are the custodian, if you are the teacher's aide, whoever you are, raise your hand. We were stunned at the number of people who raised their hand, and then to realize they were part of that process. Now, I surely understood that from Florida State, because when I was there was not a single black professional staff member, no professor, no assistant professor. The only people on that campus who looked like me were the janitorial staff and the cafeteria staff. Now, when I walked through the campus, lonely, they looked at me like, I got you, I got you. And that carried me through. So that was part of the inspiration for identifying the group. That group is now beginning to go into the schools, many of whom have retired or taken golden handshakes, to have that presence. Because unfortunately, many parents don't have the wealth of time to take off from their jobs to do that. And so they become almost like their own, brigade, going to the schools to make sure that there's a presence and that we see that somebody's looking out. Now, they're not just looking out for African American students. They're looking for all the students in the public education system to be sure their bathrooms are decent, that their campuses are not laden with graffiti, that it doesn't look like a war zone with them going through lots of metal detectors, that somebody looks at them and smiles and they can see a friendly face. And then it goes on to the teachers who inspire because they're there. So out of our work with the Expectations Project, we're beginning to see the helpers, the brigade, feel good about what they did. It was a job before, but for many of them now, it is now a commitment and a calling. And those for whom it is still a job feel empowered by it. And so we look at our church as valuing education because that's what our founders said. We operated at one point 26 public colleges. We're down to 6 now. We have to rethink what that is. But more than anything else, we're committed to the communities we serve and where we do ministry, no matter who lives there now. And so those kinds of partnerships and advocacy, and it goes down to even helping to educate the public about who needs to be elected to the school board. We don't lobby or promote, we educate the public about who needs to be on the school board. And to be at the meetings to say, we're watching your scorecard, extremely important. 3 examples of what the people are doing, and I'm happy to be able to report their ministry.
Jackie has already begun to address the next question that I want to ask to the others, and you may have some more to say about this question, but you've touched on some of this. And my question is this: what kind of work or self-examination was necessary for your community when you launched the work that you're doing? What did you have to think about that you needed to be sure you were aware of and knew before you jumped into that kind of work?
So Cathedral Arts predated me, so I'm not sure that I can respond in terms of when it was first getting started. I can tell you something we're always being mindful of is that equity is a goal, but it's also a process. So we're always mindful of trying to make sure that our board of directors and our teachers who are working with the students reflect the populations. We try to make sure that all of our programming is culturally responsive rather than just what we think the students need. We also had to learn that, so the Cathedral Arts Project, we go to the schools. We're the 20th largest district in the country, so we have tons of schools, so we go to the schools. And we had to learn that some of the schools that we thought would probably really want us because they were very challenging environments, high poverty schools, their cup, runneth over, as one of the principals told me, because there were so many organizations going to those students. So we had to learn to really look at who else might be forgotten.
Great.
I think what we had to come to terms with, again, was the level of pushback against our initiatives. Let me just tell you one example. In Lockport, Grace Church in Lockport, which had developed a pet food pantry, but people who didn't have enough money for food for themselves and their pets were going hungry so their pets could eat. So they began to have this pantry where people could get pet food. And people of color who lived around the church started coming to church, coming to coffee hour, and picking up their food. One day at Grace Church Lockport, a woman of color had a cup of coffee. She took the silver pitcher and was pouring cream into her coffee, and a member of the congregation came up and took the pitcher out of her hand and said, "That cream is not for you. The powdered milk is for you," and put powdered milk back into her hand. That's just one example of this, which is a story that swept through our diocese. And having people in the diocese recognize this was a benefit. It was a way of education, again, that what we had to overcome. When we had the reading camp, I mean, what could be more welcoming, you would think, than having a reading camp, teaching people to read in our church spaces? But we had people saying, we don't want. We're nervous about these people coming in. So we've had to, I think, stand up, and luckily we've gotten good press, I would say, in Western New York, a way that we have stood up as a way of saying, the Episcopal Church is just not going to lie down, but a lot of that opposition is coming from within, I'm sorry to say, and we're working to overcome it.
Thank you.
Do you have other things you want to say about that?
I would just add how important it is in our context for ministry that we take for granted as being the right thing to do, to be modeled. And so with the situation in Los Angeles, while many of our churches were very much involved in what was happening in public education, we were not necessarily doing it to scale. And so it was important to let the decision makers know what we were doing. And so in dialogue with the Community College District Board member who represents much of Los Angeles, along with LA Unified School District board member who represented much of our area, as well as a school system that we knew nothing about until we started this project. And there is a school system in LA County that is over just the detainees, the young people who are in juvie, and those who are in foster care. And we never knew that was a school system, but to have them come in dialogue and then to say, this is what we'd like for you to do. And they weren't quite sure we would come through, but now there's a partnership where they can look and have an expectation, and we can actually track them a little bit differently. So it was important to understand this is all God's work.
Great, thank you. Okay, I want to ask you all to think a little bit about this. What mistakes did you make along the way? And what did you learn from those mistakes?
We learned to be very particular about who we were putting with the students. We learned that sometimes people who are very well-intentioned and their heart is in the right place may not be the most equipped to deal with a challenging group of students. So we learned that we might have to find another place for those individuals, because quality is really how CAP was able to grow. We track our outcomes of our students diligently. We have outside evaluators, and so quality was preeminent. So, you know, one thing we often talk about is that equity and excellence go together. For instance, we do not give used supplies to our students. We are very much against the "it's good enough for them." When people try to give us that to give, we say no thank you. Working to maintain quality, both with who is with the students and all the supplies and all the experiences they're getting.
I think I've learned the importance of listening to all the voices in some of the parishes I've talked about where there was pushback. Perhaps I just assumed everybody would be on board immediately, and I should have been out there more closely listening. And I think since the presidential election, I have tried to be out there in the parishes. Our diocese is 50-50 on issues facing our country. And to rather than, you know, build the bishop lecturing everybody, build the listener, understanding why are people angry, why are people fearful of a thing. So that's been a learning for me, both through the experience of these projects. And I don't want to give a negative view of the way we're going. These projects are succeeding. Our people are embracing them. We're moving forward, but it's been hard work. Lots of meetings, lots of conferences, lots of time put into this. We're moving, but not immediately.
Thank you. I think what we're learning is that everyone that we confront as you work on a problem is a potential convert. And sometimes you go with a fervor and a passion and a calling and a determination that actually ends up crucifying some of the people who are potential converts. Mm-hmm. I'll use the Richard Allen School as an example. There was a great frustration with the public school system, a great frustration with the resistance. And so in setting up the school system, we really forgot that some people who were involved in that system could potentially be a part of the solution. But they really at that point had to protect their own ability to survive, their jobs. Mm-hmm. And so we've learned that somehow you have to find a way in the midst of that to convert and provide an avenue even for them to be involved in the new solution, even if it means they have to learn a new way of doing things and to change. So that, I think, will serve us well with almost everything we do.
So scooting over and making room is what you're both talking about,
Yes,
and the listening and the
That's exactly right.
And part of that is the whole transformation that happens in this kind of work that we all adore and love. But I would love for you all to talk a little bit about that transforming quality of the work that you do. How is your work changing your community or the communities around you?
So most of the transformation we really see is with the students and with the parents, and so obviously I have thousands of stories of that. But what has been gratifying is to see how the community has changed as we have taken on more of an advocacy role. When I first came 15 years ago, the school superintendent was one who said, arts do not belong during the school day. If you want to do that after school, okay, but they have no place in the school day. Fast forward to the last superintendent, we were on the ball enough that as soon as he came in, we got him to add a visual arts and a music teacher at every school, which has stayed. And now, of course, the school board ran him off. So now we're looking for another superintendent, and the school board did a huge survey to the public, and we were thrilled. Just last Wednesday, I believe it was, the results came out, and one of the top 3 things the public said they want in their superintendent is someone who values the arts for all. So all that happened because one woman 25 years ago at St. John's Cathedral said, I want to teach dance lessons to children. So that's the difference it can make if you stick with the work.
I think these projects have transformed our people. One example of that would be St. Paul's Harris Hill, a suburban parish. This educational project of linking to an inner city church, an inner city school, has taken people from a suburban church into the inner city. People have gotten to know parts of the city that they wouldn't have known. So we're trying to build bridges through education. The other thing is transform the children who've been a part of our projects. the most wonderful picture to come out of our Eaton Reading Camp is from the first summer. And there's a picture of the children being bused back to Buffalo from our headquarters of our diocese, from the camp, a school bus full of children, all reading books. And that's worth everything we're talking about here. Think about that gift of reading that we were able to help to give to those children. And these sort of wonderful looks on their faces as they were reading, that meant everything to us. So those are two examples.
Send us that picture.
Okay.
Love to have that picture.
I can think of two ways. I think one, we've begun to see telling our story as a part of evangelism. And so instead of, quoting sections of the Bible, we can actually have people see how one has lived out the work of the Bible. And that's extremely important, especially because members often take assignments from their pastors or their priests to do something, but they actually see this as a calling, something that they're doing, and dealing with a personal relationship with God. We've had an opportunity to emphasize that because it's not always that you're applauded for what they're doing, but they understand exactly why it's happening. I think the other piece, too, is to see what happens when you hold decision makers accountable and let them know you're in partnership and the response. Out of the project in Los Angeles where the community college district person came, recently there's an opportunity for her to go to the California State Assembly. One of the first calls she made was to the AME Church because she understood they were listening and watching. And so I've watched as she's gone that a name which nobody would ever really think about. Nobody knew Sidney Kamlager. It was not a household name, but she's come and she's become a part of it. She sees the church as an integral part of carrying out the integral mission of being an elected official and a servant. And I think that speaks volumes. And it may sound a little strange for a church like ours that was started on the principle of social justice. But over the 220 plus years that we've been a denomination, sometimes you take for granted where you are. And you get satisfied that the elected official comes by at election time to ask you to vote. I'm important because they came to my church. Now I think it's transforming that we want to see you in between. Mm-hmm. We want to know what you're doing. We want you to be accountable for the things that are important. And when there's a problem, we expect you to be coming to us before we come to you.
Okay, well, let's talk a little bit more about just that line that you've opened up, and I'd love to hear from all of you about who your partners are and what it takes to cultivate them and keep them as a partner. So you've opened that door. So walk the rest of the way through it.
Well, actually, because we don't have large staffs to carry out ministry, partners become extremely important. And so one of the sources that we're nurturing are fellow denominations that are important, as well as the community groups that make bricks without straws. And those are the grandmothers that become the after-school program because the parents can't afford to pay someone to do it. They become our partners because we can provide resources. We can help them get the things they need for that after-school and daycare program. Other than our elected officials, we remember the gatekeepers in elected officials' offices. And so we've been doing the inventories to find out what neighbors and friends we have who work there, who give us a hint when something's going down. What's on the agenda if you're not receiving the agenda, extremely important. I think the other pieces are the institutions in the area, some of whom you may have had an adversary relationship with. There's a huge university in South LA that everybody thinks about, and we've actually challenged them to use their resources, send out your students, get them involved. They shouldn't just come here for a 4-year education and only know their way from where they live to their class and back. They need to know real people live in this neighborhood and to become involved. So those students actually show up for the homeless count at midnight because we keep talking about what's important. So I think the partnerships are almost anybody who you believe touches the issue that we have. So with our young people, the mentoring is important. We're looking at a project now where we hope the students at this university, I'll tell you it's USC. You call USC University of South Carolina, but it's University of Southern California. And the students actually begin to understand they are part of a neighborhood when they're there because that administration now understands they're just not the largest private employer, but they are in fact a major stakeholder and they have to work with others.
Excellent. What would you say, Bill?
I would say for the diocese and the bishop, it goes without saying that the first partners have to be the parishes. And again, I want to say that I have to listen and love and embrace and try to find the right pace, and change will happen. And I want to emphasize that it has. Despite the bumps I've talked about today, we've been going forward. And so that's crucial to have the parishes on board. I think the second thing is to have the other church partners I've talked about today. AME, we've worked with, the Roman Church, the African American Protestant churches. I say the third thing, we've worked closely with the cities and the politicians. People have talked about church and state issues, but it's been odd that our mayor has been a great partner in what we've been doing. And the foundations, Say Yes Buffalo is a foundation initiative that we've been a partner with. So foundations, politicians, other churches, but above all, our own people, our own parishes.
And you said that for you in cultivating that, the key is listening to those
Listening,
partners.
absolutely, and finding the right language, the right pace,
Yeah.
and the right timing. I mean, sometimes maybe I've tried to do these things too fast, and I've learned that that doesn't always work.
Great, thank you. Kimberly?
So 99% of our partners are outside of the faith-based community. When I first came to CAP, I knew that it was the chamber in our city that controls everything, really. Went to work building partnerships with the chamber as an organization, but also the leaders, the CEOs in town. Also, as everyone has said, the elected officials. We have great partnerships, local, state, and national. And I would just encourage everyone to really look outside of the faith-based community. Our advocacy effort is led in partnership with the Kennedy Center. So they're partnering with a faith-based organization for advocacy. So I just encourage you all to look really far and wide.
If I could just go back to one.
Yeah.
Snoopy in a cartoon many years ago said, he said mankind, I'll say humankind. It's people I can't take. And our most challenging partners are those who we're serving with, who have not yet been convinced that we're authentic. And so it's important to continue to work, because once that relationship is built, it's invaluable and it's very difficult to violate. Yeah. And that ends up telling the story of the work that's being done better than anything else.
Thank you for that. Okay, I want to turn a little bit to the nitty-gritty and talk some about the practicalities of this work, fundraising, and sustaining your work. Could you address some of the issues of what's involved in keeping it solvent, the things that you're doing?
So fundraising is 80% of my job, I would say. When I came, our budget was $70,000. It's now $2 million, and that is largely through private donations. So I would encourage, if you're doing this kind of work and you haven't already set yourself up as a nonprofit, to do that, because it does lend some credibility. We are a nonprofit, but we're still controlled by the vestry of the cathedral, so the connection remains. I would encourage you, if you're just getting going, to, even if you can find one well-known philanthropist in town who will support you at any level, get that support and shout it from the rooftops, and more people will follow in that way. Would also encourage in-kind contributions. Often, particularly if businesses turn you down with money, they are more than willing to provide staff technical work for you that can be of use, office space and all of that.
Again, for us, the parishes have been key to the partnerships with schools, so they've been primarily funded by the parishes. For the reading program, it's been funded primarily by fundraising coordinated by the diocese and Buffalo foundations or generous donors. So it's not been in the diocesan budget, so we've had to, particularly from foundations and donors. For the affordable housing and other building use projects, again, foundations have been very important for that. Our most successful has been something called the Genesis Center, which is serving hundreds of people. Rather than use the church we bought a bar. That sounds very Buffalo, doesn't it? But anyway, we bought a bar. But one of the members of the congregation was a member of a foundation that was able to generously. So I appeal to you, look at the local foundations as partnerships in all of this. And I think that's a strategy that works.
I think Bishop, in talking about foundations, triggered one of the things that's worked for us, and that is doing your own asset mapping. Many of us don't know where our members and our leadership work and are engaged. And if you do the asset mapping, you find out who are in key places to give information and to help get access. And through that, we've been able to find opportunities for grants as well as in-kind contributions, because they're on the inside, they're vested, and they can help you make your best opportunity. Grants have been extremely important, and it's also important for us to have the end users, the students and the families contribute. So when the grants are written, it actually shows the kind of investment that's already there by the persons who are using it. No matter how small it is, it's important to have that investment. I don't know about you, but I find that when I give out things free, people are likely not to show up. But if there's even an investment of 50 cents, they are likely to show up for that event. I think one of the other things is working with fellow denominations. I need to publicly always thank the United Methodist Church. When I started this work, no, it is not a job, it is a position. Position. I pay to do the work. It's an opportunity that I would not give for anything, but because the budget only pays the work, not the person, there was no one there for me to really understand if we were going to put a press release out or take an initiative that had valid information. Thank God for the United Methodist Church, General Board on Church and Society. Amen. Because I was asked to work with them representing the historic Black denomination. I thought, oh, this is how you get it done. They had 26 staff people doing what I was expected to do. And so when I talked to Jim Winkler, he thought about it. He says, okay. And after he got tired of me calling, he just told his staff, when she calls, just do it. And so I can say that in the family of those, there's never time that I've called and needed information that they were preparing for the United Methodist Church that they were not willing to share. And I found that to be true with others, but that got me started because I really realized the vision, and all of our churches have different levels of support for different causes. And we talk about getting to heaven and being happy. We need to start down here. And I think the third thing is the in-kind. There is so much that if we simply ask, people will be willing to give. And we know now we're in threat of the write-offs not being available, the tax relief from gifts. But if we appeal to people about what they already do, that they already have in stock, they already have in-house, that they can utilize is extremely important. So we really try to push for the in-kind donations of people who have likely goals and missions.
Thank you. All right, thank you all so very much.
Thank you.
We're now going to change gears and open this up for your questions to the panel. And Joni, I believe, has the mic and is going to come around. If you raise your hand, she will come to you and let you ask these good folks a question. So she's on her way. Y'all are fabulous.
You set us up. It was great.
Questions?
How much of what we said was true?
Here's one.
Hi, my question is,
How about you introduce yourself to us, please? And
hi, my name is Vanessa Frazier.
Thank you.
And thank you for being here. This is very informative. My question is, how do we get involved with what you're doing, the Bishops Forum, and becoming those partners? How does that take place?
How do you get involved with the Bishop's Public Education Initiative? Are you live in South Carolina? And your church is? Revealing Word Ministries. Okay, great. We need to connect about that because we do so want partners from all denominations and traditions to be involved in our work. What you need to do is call and invite me to come speak to your church. And I will do that. Who else has a question? Yes, back in the back. Stick your hand up again. I think she was just stretching. All right, well, yes, I see. There's one over here on the side, Jody.
My name's Les Hegwood. I'm a former public educator and Episcopal school head. It ran me right into seminary, so I'm currently a middler at Sewanee. My question is, this is about public education. What about our Episcopal schools? I've realized that there are opportunities for us, and there are examples of how Episcopal schools join in this equity, this vision for equity. However, I'm from the Diocese of Mississippi, and that's where I led in an Episcopal school. And the reality there is that school choice is going to come into play, it looks like. And when it does, the gulf between the haves and the have-nots and the quality of public schools versus the quality of private schools is going to increase. And it seems to me that Episcopal schools need to be a part of that solution, in addition to the Episcopal Church more broadly. Can any of you speak to that conundrum?
Yes, thank you for asking that question, because the very church in Lockport that I was talking about that seemed to be going up against a wall has now been moving forward wonderfully with a project which is to found an Episcopal school in the parish. So the people in the parish are supporting this idea, and the idea of having an Episcopal school which can serve the town, the region, the neighborhood, has brought new life both to the congregation and a sense of social outreach, so that public education is not the only answer, of course, and in this case, private education is doing a good work for us.
Independent education.
Other questions? Well, if not, I'm going to take the next couple of minutes that we have left to ask these good people, what's next for you? What are your plans? What next?
So we are working, there are 128 elementary and middle schools in our district, and we are working, brainstorming how we can expand to serve students at all of those schools, because it breaks our heart, and it happens all the time when a student moves to another neighborhood, and so we don't have a program at their new school. So we're trying to avoid that. And we're also trying to figure out how we can help other people around the country. We sort of have cap in a box, and how we can help others who don't need to reinvent the wheel, and we could handle some of the central office work.
Well, my hope is to keep all of these projects going, and to see the school that we're talking about come into being, and to provide the funding for the reading camp. And this is on my mind because of the rules of the Episcopal Church, I'll have to retire in about 15 months. So I have 15 months to help secure a lot of this funding, make sure this foundation is laid, and then I can say bye-bye. But I have to say that it's been a wonderful opportunity to be able to live out some of the projects we've been able to talk about today.
We're very pleased to be a part of a coalition pulled together by the Expectations Project, and we look forward to being able to demonstrate best practices and to find local congregations across the United States and maybe outside of the United States that want to look at the model. The Richard Allen School's founder is working with us to try to use best practices for trying to excite young people of color, especially those who come from trauma-informed communities, traumatic communities, to create the trauma-informed school environments, and they're going to be involved with us. We're also looking at the Freedom School model of Marian Wright Edelman. We have one of our millennial members who directs the school program in the West, and so we're going to try to bring those practices of helping to build self-esteem and to get parents engaged in the work that's being done. And we look forward to being able to find the kind of seed funding that the local congregations can build upon to get started, to perhaps have that one person who just needs a little stipend to get started so that we can actually build it. We are trying to set the example of leveraging resources, and so with all of the opportunities, we'll be able to demonstrate the involvement and the engagement of the community and the church itself. We believe that we're going to rescue the public education system wherever this happens, because the people will take over.
I believe her. I believe her. Well, I want to thank you all again for being here with us.
Thank you.